Hello, and welcome to Enhancing Functional Math Skills with Symbols and Visuals. I'm very excited to have you here today to learn more about doing that. So let's dive right in. So first off, let's start with an introduction. Let me share a little bit about who I am so we can get to know one another a little better and you can know who's talking to you today. So my name is Jen Adams. I am an elementary and early childhood educator originally, taught 4 years in elementary and first grade and pre-K. So that's where the beginning of my background starts. And then after that, I taught for a couple years as an actually 1 year as an alternative education teacher. And during that time, I received my master's in special education. And then from there, I decided to take the leap into teaching self-contained autistic support. And I did that for 10 years, working with students mostly in middle school grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Part of that time I spent working in a brick and mortar classroom, but then I actually shifted and started working for a cyber school. So, and that is my current home right now. However, I am not in the classroom right now. I am actually a special education instructional coach at the same cyber school that I started at. And it is a public cyber charter school in Pennsylvania. And so my job now is supporting teachers in classroom with best practices, best instructional routines, curriculum support, data collection, data analysis, all of that good stuff. And so I am thoroughly enjoying working with teachers who ultimately then are working with their students, and I'm helping way more classrooms. So it is super fun. And then I'm also, just to give you more background on my career, I am a certified administrator. I also have a Wilson Reading certification and work with students with dyslexia for reading as well. So although this presentation today is math-based, I also have a strong background in English language arts. And then last but not least, I am the author and owner of Teach Love Autism, which is a website, blog, store, all filled with resources, information, activities, and tips for you to learn more about working with students with disabilities. And a lot of it highlights my years in self-contained special education, but it is starting to branch out more and work just generically in the field of special education, which we all know so many of those practices can be applied really with any student in any classroom. Doesn't matter if it's general education or special education. And if you're interested, you can go check out my website. It's listed there, www.teachloveautism.com. All right. Now that we know each other, let's dive into what the meat of our presentation is today. So we're going to be looking at a couple main kind of questions or topics today. First off, we're going to start off with what is functional math skills? Like, what are they? Would we consider to be functional math skills? Then we're going to dive a little bit into what are visuals, because then our goal today is to kind of blend the two together. So then we'll talk about tools and strategies for using visuals to enhance math skills in the classroom. And then also we will talk about some best practices, and I have some examples of some visual materials that you can use in a classroom, in a homeschool environment, pretty much anywhere you would be working with a student on math. So we're going to dive into that. So let's get started. All right. So what are functional math skills? Because I'm sure you've heard of the subject math, but we often think of adding, and we think of multiplication, and we think of fractions, and we think of, algebra. All of those are your typical math concepts that are taught. That's not wrong. However, there are some functional math skills that affect us in our everyday life. So these are skills that you're going to use a lot throughout your daily routines and activities and lifestyles, things such as counting money, telling time, or measuring ingredients in a recipe. And the list could go on and on. Actually, adding and subtracting could be added in there because we do that in our everyday lives when we're doing different things. Just counting things can still be considered functional, looking at prices, reading schedules. All of these things are functional activities that we do that have a math base to them. Now, in special education, these skills are crucial because they promote independence and help students feel more confident in real life scenarios that they will one day need to do. And so, a lot of times, we want to make our focus on helping students to be more accessible to these skills. And some of the best ways to teach these students these skills is by using visuals and symbols to help them learn it. So now that we talked about what are functional math skills, what are visuals? So if you have never heard of or used before a visual in any kind of an educational setting, they are used to help students to better understand complex concepts. So instead of just telling a student to add, in the picture here you see 1 plus 2, and figure out that it's 3. We're actually giving them a visual representation here of what that looks like. 1 Lego, then we're going to add 2 more Legos, which is ultimately going to equal 3 Legos total. And so this is a very concrete way for students to visually see the process of the math skill, understand how it works, and kind of put some more logic to it that makes it very concrete for those students that maybe have a difficult time understanding some more abstract ideas, especially when it comes to math. This is also great for students that are visual learners, of course, because visually you can see it, and kinesthetic learners as well, because it does typically involve movement, especially if you think of things like if we started with the 1 Lego on that screen and added the 2, then we're moving them together and we're physically moving them, which is all of that kinesthetic type learning, to create the pile of 3 to help the students understand the concept of adding. Same with taking away. So it really can be multi-sensory in the supporting students to learn concepts that, again, may be more difficult otherwise for them to learn. All right, so now that we talked about that, let's dive into some ways that we can enhance these skills with different types of tools. So there are lots of different options out there, many different types of, typically they're called manipulatives. So you can see they're on the screen, we're calling them math manipulatives. These are things like counters, blocks, even an abacus. I've seen in the picture there, you can see the play money, rulers, dice, anything like that are considered math manipulatives. Even something like a handheld clock that has hands on it that the student can move around would also be another example of a math manipulative. A balance where we're like figuring out the weight of objects and using a balance or a scale, again, would be another type of tool. And then those manipulatives that go with it. I also think of base 10 blocks, fraction tiles. There's a ton, okay? If you haven't taken that yet. But just the ones on the screen, there are a few examples. And then there are also digital or virtual options for use as well. So if you don't want to have a ton of math manipulatives hanging around your classroom, hanging around your house, ways to store them, ways to keep them, you got to worry about keeping them organized. I actually recommend using something like a virtual math manipulative. And there's a couple sites I'm going to share with you today that you can access those materials. And then again, don't have to worry so much about cleaning it up, keeping it organized. Where are you going to store it? And then the other thing I'm going to show you today is a couple different apps that I have listed here that were just absolute game changers in my classroom because they took the visual component of teaching kids math, made it engaging, and my students learned math concepts so much easier. So both the websites that are listed there, Math Learning Center, Didax, and Oryx Learning, all three of those, you could do a simple Google search. I do plan on showing you a little bit about them today. You could do a simple Google search though and find them, and they are all free. And then the apps Toto Math, Touch Math, and Bugs and Numbers are all apps. I do believe most of them are paid. They may have a free version available that you can try, but they all are apps that work really well on iPads or tablets for students to be able to interact, like I said, with a more visual type feeling to them. All right, so I told you there were a couple websites. This is two examples of websites that have materials that I do want to show you. The one towards the top of the screen there that starts off with the Unifix cubes and the 10 frames and the number lines, that is a website called Didax. And as you can see, they have lots of different options for different virtual manipulatives. So when you go to the site, you would click on one of those images you see there on the screen. It would open up the virtual manipulative, and then you could start to use it. Same goes with that bottom image there. However, you can see there's some different ones. There's a clock. There are base 10 blocks there. There are Cuisenaire rods, a geo board, fraction tiles, some things that are a little bit different. So I often found that I was using a couple different sites, especially the ones that I named in the previous slide, to kind of get that rounded amount of manipulatives that I was looking for. So now that I've kind of talked about these, let me show you some of these sites so you can see. Let me share my screen. All right, there we go. So this is actually I believe I'm saying it right, the Oryx Learning website. So you would just go to oryxlearning.com. And this is an example of one of the manipulatives that I showed you. These would be the base 10 blocks. And this one I love. So what I really like about this is there's lots of different ways to use this. So the first thing you can do is just drag over the manipulatives that you are looking to use. And then you can notice here that you get a total summary report here of how much is here. I can keep dragging them over. You can change the labels that you are using on here. So if you want labels above each item so that you can see how much is there. And then the other cool thing that you can do here is over here on the side, you can actually do some addition, some factoring, some place value, and some comparing. As you can see, I need a free account to access any more of this. All they ask for is an email address, and you can sign up and you can use this. So again, this allows you to, and I can move these pieces around. I can actually use the pencil here to write things on the screen and use and get that interactivity out of it, and kids really like it. So it can help to take that meaning again to what is a 1, what is a 10, what is 100, and really bring it to life with that visual. The other one that I have to share with you, this is Didax, and this is just, again, one of the virtual manipulatives they have on their site. This is the 10 frame. And so typically you see a 10 frame when you are working on addition with a student. So say we have an addition problem and the question or the equation is 3. So I would put 3 red and plus 2. And I'd put 2 here. This helps to provide a very concrete way for that student to take 3 plus 2. And then it also utilizes the concept of the 10 frame, which for a lot of our students helps them to quickly recall how much is there, because it's set up the same way, meaning there's always 5 on the top, 5 on the bottom. So I can quickly look at this and use a skill called subitizing, which is just really quickly being able to look at a number of objects and determine how much it is, which is typically a skill many early learners need in order to move forward and get better at their counting skills. But this helps to provide some structure to make that easier for learning. So if you ever think about how easy it is for you to look at the way that the dots on a die are set up, you're actually doing the skill of subitizing, because you know that when you see 3 going in a diagonal, you know it's a 3. very quickly. You did not have to sit there and count each single dot on the die to know it was 3, because you've learned that that pattern is 3. And same goes with a tens frame. So, and the nice thing about this one is I can turn the tens frame to make it go in different directions. I also can add additional ones. So if I have larger math problems, I'd maybe write the math problem down at the bottom here and then use those math manipulatives to represent the problem. So those are 2 websites again that I'm sharing with you to be able to use virtually if you're not so into the idea of having that hands-on experience, or you just don't have those manipulatives available. The virtual ones work great. So wanted to share that with you. The next 2 things are videos to some of the apps that I also shared that I think are really great to use with students in your classroom. This one is called Bugs and Numbers. So let's take a look. All right, and as you can see there, that is made by the company Little Bit Studio, and it is called Bugs and Numbers. There's some other ones, Bugs and Buttons, I believe, maybe have a little bit more of an ELA focus to them, but again, great interactive, highly engaging app for working on some math skills, as you could see there. So recommend that one 100%. My students, even in middle school, loved using it. And then this next one is called Todo Math. Again, let's take a look and see what this one does. All right, so that was Todo Math. Again, lots of visuals included in all of those fun learning games. Highly recommend taking a look and finding that app if it is something you think would be helpful to the children that you're working with. All right, so now that I've shown you kind of some tech-based or hands-on manipulative type materials, now I want to talk about some other tools for enhancing those functional skills. These are all going to be examples of things that you can also use with students to help them in terms of gaining some more functional math skills. Now, the first thing I have is just hands-on resources. So resources, again, where we're focusing on getting that kinesthetic approach, getting kids to physically move their bodies to add that component into their learning, because as we know, the more senses we have involved in our learning, the more likely we are to retain that information. So the top image there, those are actually called file folders. File folders are an interactive activity. Typically, the pieces on the file folders are movable, and you can Velcro them and put them on and off onto the pages there as they work. So the one in the background there of that picture is a measurement activity. Students are measuring the sandcastles and then Velcroing by picking up the piece and placing it to the spot next to it to match it. And then the other one is identifying bills and coins and matching those pictures to one another to help students work on their money skills. And then another thing that you can use is task cards or flashcards. So flashcards are not anything brand new. Flashcards usually are some kind of tool that you use to show to a student, and they would look at it and they have to recall back whatever that information on that card is. So I think of like alphabet flashcards or number flashcards where it would have a number 1 with maybe 1 teddy bear on it. The student's supposed to tell you that's 1, right? These can be really good for lots of repetition, lots of practice on the same skill. Task cards are also very similar. However, task cards also require the student in some way to provide an answer in a way other than just verbally stating the answer. So these two on the screen here at the bottom are actually examples of task cards. The first one says, which is more? And it just has visual pictures of hands that the student would have to count the fingers there and figure out which one is more. Now, how do they answer on this task card to pick their answer choice? You have lots of options. You can use an actual clothespin and allow the student to clothespin on top of the choice. I've had students, if I've laminated these, which means they have some protective coating on them, they're not just paper-based, I've allowed them to use a dry erase marker to circle them because we can erase it right back off. I've also seen teachers use binder clips to clip the answer. I've seen them use paper clips. You can actually stick these on a cookie sheet or any kind of magnetic backed thing and then stick magnets on the answers. Lots of different ways to kind of make them interactive and fun for students. And then the second one there, again, that is also a measurement activity, and it's asking about the concepts of long and short. Now, this one actually has 2 visual components to it, if you notice. So the first visual component is the actual tape measure, right? There is an arrow pointing to the one at the top there, that red arrow. But then at the bottom, the 2 answer choices, one says short, one says long. If you notice, there is also visual support there with it. It doesn't just say the word short by itself in text. It doesn't just say the word long by itself in text. There's actually another visual that the student can then use to compare, again, taking that concrete thing and making it easy to understand and not so abstract. So again, highly recommend using these hands-on resources, task cards, file folders, things like this. I have tons of these on my website in my store that you can access. Actually, all of the things pictured here are accessible on my website and you can gain access to use if you feel like you need some more hands-on materials like this in your math instruction. All right, let's continue. So the next thing I have here is something else that you can use to teach some functional skills is calendars and schedules. So these are things that are practical for students. They're going to interact with them every day. We're always looking to figure out what the date is. We're always looking to figure out what time of our day is. What does our schedule have included? What tasks do we have to complete that day? So it is a super functional thing to teach students how to use them. So I highly recommend having some kind of calendar in your classroom, in your homeschool environment for students to reference. And then you can ask different types of questions. You know, what date will it be next Thursday? Or when are we going to the park? And maybe you also have a visual there that the student can see when that's happening. Same goes for schedules. Listing out their schedule using visuals is, of course, going to support students a lot and allow them to understand things much easier than just being verbally told something. And then the other item on this slide you see here is timers and clocks. So a lot of students struggle with the concept of time. very abstract. For many students, think of young children often struggle, right, with things like waiting because they don't understand how long 5 minutes is. And a parent may say, you need to wait 5 minutes, but they have no idea what 5 minutes means. Whereas if you have something like that purple timer on the screen where it visually changes color as that time is disappearing, that student or child can then understand that concept of time. I'll be honest, if somebody told me I had to wait 5 minutes, I probably could not exactly know how long that time period is. I may be able to guess roughly if 5 minutes has passed, but I wouldn't be able to specifically unless I sat there and counted every single second while I was waiting. So even for us as adults, the concept of time without some kind of visual support can be difficult to understand. And then the clock that you see there, I love because it does a lot of our students also struggle typically with using analog clocks. And so this actually provides a ton of visual support to show students the minutes that have passed, the hour hand, the minute hand's different colors, the second hand is different colors. So supporting students again with being able to tell time. So not just understand how much time has gone by, but actually what time is it? What time will it be in a few hours? Working on elapsed time, things like that. And visuals can be an excellent way to introduce that concept and continue to work on it. All right. And then one of the things that I feel like last but not least is real world materials. So using things that students might see in their real everyday lives to help support learning those functional math skills. So things like menus, because there's prices on them and serving sizes and calories and things with numbers that we're trying to figure out and add together or subtract, all of that. Working on things like budgeting also as well. If you only have $20, you need to figure out what you can buy off this menu without going over your budget, right? Completely a real world type of math skill that all of our students need. Other things like bus schedules or airplane schedules or movie show times are all things that are schedules that require us to know when these things are happening, know how long they're going to take so we don't miss them, right? Even doctor's appointments, we need to know what time the doctor appointment's at. We need to look at our clocks, figure out how much time we have. How long is it going to take to travel there? Again, a real world experience using some functional math skills. I love using grocery store flyers with students to help them with adding prices, coming up with the budget for their groceries for the week or for the month, because that's something we all do in our everyday lives. Also being able to figure out if you're getting a discount on something or what the sale price might be, and then kind of comparing as well, right? Which of these two types of ketchup is going to save me money because I've got a budget and I want to buy the one that is the most cost effective, and helping students understand what that means. Things like reading receipts can be very helpful for students. Again, budgeting, but also things like how much money should I get back? If I give somebody $20 and my um, purchases cost a certain amount, can I calculate the change back that I should get? Or look at that receipt and make sure everything adds up the way it's supposed to. And then lastly, maps, which we're looking at a lot of math revolved around or evolving around measurement, right? So how many miles does it take to get somewhere? The distance, the direction, understanding spatial reasoning of directions, such as like we're moving north or we're moving south, and having students be able to calculate how long it's going to take them to travel from one place to another. All of these are real world math skills that students need in their everyday lives. And these are all things that I love to incorporate into my instruction using some of the manipulatives and materials that I discussed earlier in the presentation. So just some things to keep in mind to think about incorporating into your math instruction wherever that environment is. Now, the strategies for using symbols and visuals in your instruction are pretty straightforward. So some things you want to make sure you're doing is being very consistent with using them. I don't recommend when you're first teaching a concept to students to change up the symbols and visuals you're using a lot, try to keep them the same. So if you're going to use a particular version of a plus sign, I would continue to use that until the student gets more fluent in being able to add. I wouldn't change the color or the size of it or anything like that, especially if it's a skill that they're just beginning to learn. Other things like using symbols that represent the same thing. So maybe a picture like you see of these solid figures, I might just use these pictures to start. And then eventually, as students start to be able to identify cubes, spheres, cones, then I can bring in other things, maybe even bring in some physical manipulatives and see if the student then can transfer that skill from seeing it in visual form to seeing it as a concrete object in front of them. All great ways to help students to start to recognize the concept and understand it in different types of settings and environments. Make sure that you are using all of these visuals to actually illustrate things that you feel like are abstract for your students. If they can do the skill without the visual support, then don't provide it. It's always best to go with that least restrictive model, meaning we shouldn't be providing extra support unless the student needs it, because we always want to promote the independence in doing that skill as simple as possible or as originally as it's meant to be. So if the student can tell time without that, if I think back to that clock that I showed you all, if they can tell time without all of those different color-coded supports and little extra numbers around it, don't add them in there. Just leave them out and continue to let them work on it. But maybe they need something similar to a number line when it has elapsed time, where the student needs to be able to follow that in order to be able to figure out how many hours have gone by or how many hours are left in something, and use a tool that way. Your visual aids should really complement whatever instructions you're doing and give students more than one way to understand the concept. So sometimes you'll use different materials. So a lot of times when I'm adding with students, I don't just use the tens frame like I showed you in those virtual manipulatives. Sometimes I'm going to use counters. Sometimes I'm going to use connecting cubes. Sometimes I'm going to use a number line. So the more, once a student gets comfortable using one type of visual, try a couple others. That will also help to generalize the skill. And if I'm being honest, you may find certain visuals work for certain learners better than others. Just all depends on how they grasp information and process it. So if one doesn't work, keep trying until you get to the one that you find that student most successful in. The other thing we want to make sure we do is create visual rich environments. So making sure that places where we can offer visual supports to students are being utilized. I think of this in classrooms, or maybe if you have a dedicated place to do homeschooling with a student or learner, that you have some visual supports and aids ready to go for the student, whether it's up on a bulletin board, up on the wall. I've had some visual supports for my own students or my own children even, in our kitchen on the refrigerator, because we would typically sit at the table and work on their math work, but then we'd grab some visuals off of the refrigerator if they needed help learning a skill and it was right there and easily accessible. Okay, so keeping them in the common places of the house where a lot of daily routines happen will really make it easier for you to just incorporate it in your everyday life and get students used to using them. So these are going to definitely reinforce, which is what we want to do. We want them to keep using them, and make it more practical for you and the student to use them. All right. Well, I hope that this was helpful for you in learning more about enhancing your math instruction, especially when it comes to functional skills and um, using visual supports and just kind of how to marry the two together. So I thank you all for your time. Let's take a look here at my final slide here. I just want to show you that there are many ways to connect with me. If you enjoyed this seminar or video and want to learn more, you can check me out in lots of different places. Of course, you can go to my website there, Teach Love Autism. I do have two Facebook ways to reach out to me. I have a page, but I also have a group, and it's called the Teach Love Autism Community. And it's filled with educators, parents, service providers, all kinds of people that just want best for students. And I highly encourage you join that group and get in on some of the cool conversations and information that I'm sharing over there. I also have, on top of my shop on my website, I do have a Teachers Pay Teachers store called Teach Love Autism, where you can get many of the resources, again, that I shared today, such as the task cards, the file folders, and things like that. And then you can find me on many social media platforms. I mentioned Facebook. You can also find me on Pinterest, Instagram, TikTok, and also YouTube. I didn't list it here, but all of those are under the same handle, Teach Love Autism. So if you search that on any of those social media platforms, you will find me there. So thank you so much. It was wonderful to share all of this information with you. I always love connecting with educators. If you ever want to reach out, you can also contact me via my email, and that would be jen@teachloveautism.com. I'm happy to chat and provide support to you in any way you need. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.